right, welcome back to another episode of Lassiter Law, and we have something exciting. Rather than just talking about legal theories and explanations and how to do things, we're actually going to talk about current events this time.
All right, excite me, Mark Lassiter. What do you have in store for today?
Well, there's a trial going on in the state of New York, and it involves a former Marine by the name of Daniel Penny. And what has happened was he was charged with manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide in the death of a man named Jordan Neely, who was a subway performer. Now, as I understand it, the facts are this. There are lots of people on the subway. This subway performer, because the subway's open to everyone, is going up and down threatening people, right? So I want you to imagine, Lacey, that you're on a subway in New York. Now, I myself have never been on a subway in New York. I have been in Russia, but not in New York.
I've been in New York, and the subway performers are really interesting because there's a lot of talented people out there, but I know that's not what you're speaking of for this, because then there are also people who go up and down the subway and demand money from you. And
Well, let's start there. Okay, so in order for, and I want to come out at this from a criminal defense perspective and let the public here know, what our audience know, what I think should happen as far as a strategy. But in order to do this, what I believe a good defense lawyer would do is he would paint a picture. In order to paint a picture, we need to paint that picture for you, the audience, so you can kind of go through an exercise of what do you think you would do if you were a juror in this situation. And myself as the defense attorney, I would bring someone from a New York subway. And I was like, describe to me what a normal ride on a subway is. Do you get assaulted? Do you get accosted? What is it like? Can you just sit there by yourself and nobody bother you? Is that typical? What if you don't want to be around these performers? Do you have to get off? Do they get in your face? Tell me what an experience led to a person that's never been on a subway before. Lacey, what is it like to be on a New York subway, just going from one place to another?
For the most part, I would say in my limited experience, people don't mess with you. And I said people demand money. They don't demand money, but they will come up and ask for money and almost guilt you into it. Like, you need to give me money. I've never had that experience because I just don't look people in the eyes.
Do they look homeless?
Homeless or in need of money.
Okay, so these people and it's not an uncommon thing for them to come up and ask for money.
I've seen it happen before, yes.
And if you just don't make eye contact and just ignore them, do they typically move on?
They can move on. Sometimes you might have to move actual like if you don't want to be around them, you might have to physically get up and move. That's if there's even room, because sometimes it can be jam-packed in there.
Are there any security personnel on these subways that are monitoring anything?
Not as far as I've seen, no.
So you have these people that are making other people feel uncomfortable. I mean, fair to say?
Yes, can.
And demanding things from the riders of the subway that had to pay to get on this subway. And there's no one, or at least very limited, that you have seen monitoring these people and saying, hey, this is not you don't have a permit to do a beggar's platform here, for lack of a better word.
Some people will perform and then want money after that because you witnessed a performance that you didn't ask for.
Right. And you almost feel obligated in that scenario. Well, let me ask it to you this way. When you were on, how would you feel if that person that instead of demanding for money was threatening to harm you?
I would be freaked out. I don't do confrontation, period, much less threats.
So would you want somebody to stop that person?
Yes.
Would you care how they were stopped?
No, I wouldn't care how they were stopped. I would want someone to step up because I wouldn't know how to handle myself in that situation.
And that's exactly right. And now we typically rely on our police department for this, or if we're riding a subway, we're paying for a service, that service should be protected. And I would think that the New York subway, whoever runs that, if that's the city, they owe an obligation to their citizens that when they're writing something that the citizen has to pay for, you need to protect them while they're in your service. They are in your care.
And it's mandatory to get around there. I mean, that is their transportation. As traffic's too bad, most people don't have cars. They don't know how to drive if they've grown up in that area and have never needed a car.
So let's talk about the situation that they have right now. So they have Daniel Penny, who is a former Marine, right? And they always bring this up. He is a former Marine. He's a former Marine. He's a former Marine, as if that somehow makes you a lethal weapon. You know what it does is it gives you training in how to follow orders. It does give you some specialized training in fighting techniques and things like that. But those techniques are not civilian techniques. They're not something that we utilize unless we are in a wartime situation. So when someone says he's a former Marine and acts like that's some sort of a bad thing, and that the harm that he caused in this case is because of his training, I am as a military personnel, am extremely offended. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. When did it become a bad thing to serve your country? Why are we prosecuting him on this basis? And I want everybody to keep in mind, the facts of this situation are clear. It's not disputed. You have 20 some odd witnesses to the events. And the events are this guy, Jordan Neely, a normal subway performer, which I don't want to say is not a job, but it's not a job. It's something that you do maybe for extra money. In this case, it sounds like he did it for money. And really the tragic part of this is the mental illness part of this, but he's going up and down, causing a ruckus, threatening people, throwing items at people like trash, to the extent that these people are scared. Now, the statements put out by Daniel Penny are that he saw these actions by Jordan Neely. People were saying somebody needs to do something. He actually did something, and he put him in a chokehold. And when he put him in a chokehold, he held on to it for a long enough period of time that it incapacitated Mr. Neely. And then when the paramedics arrived, Mr. Neely was still alive, and he subsequently died. And what they are determining now as part of the trial is cause of death. And so the New York City Medical Examiner's Office comes out, looks at the body, and says, we know the cause of death. It was from being choked. Now, here's the interesting part. Put your hat on for a second. You're a police detective. You know all of these facts except the medical examiner. You know that Daniel Penny was the one that choked him out. You know that he was breathing, Mr. Neely was, at the time that Daniel Penny released him. Okay. So if he's breathing, if I were to choke you out right now and you're breathing when I let go of the chokehold, sometimes a chokehold does not kill you. It is to restrain you.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's there to kill you. It just depends on the situation. In this case, it would appear that when you release him, because you can say he is a Marine, he does at least have some training in putting on a chokehold. He knows the difference between how to cut off your air and how not to.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that he released Mr. Neely and he still was alive, the only conclusion is he's alive because Daniel Penny chose not to cut off his air. So if that is the case, how do we have a manslaughter charge?
Well, question, can there be lasting damage from a
Certainly.
chokehold? I mean,
It certainly can.
So, I mean, that would be my question, because that's what I'm not clear about.
It could potentially lead to someone's death later on if there are other circumstances in play. For instance, Mr. Neely had some mental illness conditions for which he took medication, and there is toxicology reports where he had illicit drugs in his system. So if you combine drugs with other things, yeah, it's going to produce a different result than it would in a normal person. And we're not talking about a normal person when we talk about Jordan Neely, because apparently he does have a history of mental illness, which leads us to another discussion as to why in this country with such a huge mental illness problem. We didn't used to have that. When we started the country, mental illness was very, very rare. It has become more and more and more prevalent, which is the reason that we have school shootings. You have school shootings because a person is not mentally sound. He is not mentally sane. There is something going on, either emotionally, something going on medically, and we'll never know until we get to the bottom of it. But what we do know is that many, 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 many more people suffer from mental illness than have ever in the course of human history. And we don't have the capability of dealing with it as a country, as a state.
Well, I would beg to differ though. I think mental illness has always been around and just undiagnosed.
I would disagree entirely, but here's why. Because we have now moved off of the natural order that the human body was meant to do. And then what I mean by that is a lot of it is diet. We now eat pesticides. And if you don't believe me, go in and look. And I know everybody's up in arms about RFK Jr. heading Health and Human Services, but understand, even if you disagree with his politics, read his books. Look at what he has uncovered. Look at what other people have. Don't trust him. Trust other people. Don't trust a party, because a lot of what Daniel Penny is going through right now, I believe, is political prosecution. But if you look at not what somebody is telling you to believe, go and find it out for yourself. When I talk about things as a criminal defense attorney and I talk to a jury, I ask them to separate opinion and fact. We've talked about this many times on the show. Separate your feelings for something. Start from ground zero and say, what do I actually know is true? Put it in my hand. Prove it to me. What I can tell you, and has been proven many, many, many times over, is that the food that we eat is less safe than the food we give to our animals. It is atrocious. So the FDA, you think they're out there protecting you. You know what they're doing? They're approving whatever corporation is going to donate to the political party of that time and get what is approved. You don't believe me? Go look at the food pyramid. Were you trained on the food pyramid in school? Because I was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's all BS. That does not exist. That's all wrong. That created the fat generation that we have today. People are literally overweight because we allow things that no other country allows, by the way. If you go to Italy and you eat pasta for 2 weeks straight, you will come back skinnier than if you came over here and you ate what we consider to be healthy food. Now, how is that even possible? Because if you look at the ingredients they have in these other countries, they are minute. They're like 3, 4 things. We have like 27. And all of them are from farming products in which we used unbelievably unsafe pesticides, stuff that would kill. When we use a poison to kill the bugs and the animals that we don't want there, we then ingest it because that's where it comes from. If you feed a cow a bunch of corn, which is not their normal habitat, which is not what they're supposed to eat, and then the cow gets diabetes, and then you sell the cow just to get it fatter, and then we eat the cow, we're eating diabetes, like literally. So we are eating the disease that we don't want to have. And then we're complaining that we have mental illness because it does affect the brain. It does affect the body. So that's why I disagree entirely. I believe that the mental illnesses that we have are brought solely from the dietary things that we have been eating. And then we as a society try and justify the things that we're doing. The young person for, like, say, ADHD, I believe at least 50%, if not more, of the people that are diagnosed with ADHD are not ADHD. It's just an excuse. Stop trying to find an excuse for your child. You know what? Look at some of the literature. Children are not supposed to be contained to a desk for 8 hours a day. They're supposed to run and play and do things. So maybe the answer is not that we need to contain them and say there's a medical reason why you're not focused. Maybe take them outside every once in a while, right? I know we do recesses, but they have to have time to develop and they have to have time, and their brains are not supposed to be just locked in here. You will look at this 8 hours a day, and that is what school is supposed to be. Now, I'm getting on a tangent here. But when we talk about mental illness, what I want to go at is with this is that we are woefully inadequate as a state and society in dealing with the people who do exhibit traits of mental illness. We don't know how to diagnose them. Psychology has just become a pseudoscience at this point. Nobody really knows because you can't stop it, because we don't stop the thing that's causing it. And if you just try and prevent it, and somehow a pill became the fix to everything, you can't take pills to become better mentally.
I think that I'm Alice in Wonderland, and one day I'm going to eat the right cocktail of pills and be okay. I will nibble on this and nibble on this. And no, I have not found my correct cocktail. The first pill that I had to cancel was my depression pills because it was so expensive. But my Adderall and my sleeping pills are not. So I had to get rid of my depression pills. Now, I was just on a very light antidepressant to get me through a time, so it wasn't something
Sure.
I have to have. So I was able to make that decision. But I was like, this is a joke that I can get my Adderall and my sleeping pills affordable, but my Wellbutrin was too expensive for me to buy.
So let me just ask you a simple question, right? And just totally off topic. So you take Adderall,
Mm-hmm.
which stops you from sleeping, by the way. And then you have to take a sleeping pill so that you can go to sleep.
But I'm going to justify this. I had odd work hours for most of my career.
Sure.
So my sleeping patterns were very off and I couldn't sleep through the night. I have bad anxiety. If I have to set an alarm, I will wake up before my alarm, but I will wake up multiple times out of fear that I have overslept. And that's how I slept
That's normal.
half of my career, because if I woke up and it was light outside, that means I overslept because I was getting up at 2:30 in the morning. So yes, you're not wrong, but that's why I'm on the cocktail.
No, I get it.
And
So let me ask you this. Do you think that you could now sleep normally without the sleeping pill?
Nope.
See? And now you are a lifelong member of I need, what is it, melatonin?
Melatonin gives me crazy dreams and doesn't, or
But some sort of sleeping pill. So that, and that's probably part of the problem that I think is that we have developed this system where if you give yourself a drug, and this is why I'm very adamant, I'm not a pill taker. I hate taking pills because I want my body to do it naturally. Now, there's some things you can't, you have to take for, penicillin, or you have to take an antibiotic or whatever. But if you give your body a pill that is to, let's just say it's a high cholesterol, right? And to adjust for that, well, it affects something else. And now you have a deficiency in that department and you have to fix that. You can't just take a pill and expect no repercussions. It has a repercussion on your body. All that's a different conversation, but it leads to the same conversation, which is, what do we do with those people in our country that are mentally ill? Because they don't need to be institutionalized. That's a thing of the past. I mean, we used to do lobotomies, and obviously that's horrible. But if you think about these people that you'll see, these homeless people, and they're here in Dallas, they're everywhere.
mm-hmm.
Many, many, many of them are homeless because of some sort of mental illness. Shouldn't we have a place for them? I mean, we talk about, as a society, we want to take care of those who are less fortunate, right? And again, this is kind of going into political, but if we as a society want to do that, we should not be sending $90 billion to Ukraine. What the F is Ukraine going to do to help us? Nothing. What we should be doing is maybe spending $90 billion to fix a mental health industry that doesn't have the resources that it needs, maybe for studies. Maybe we don't need to send people over to China to research a virus just to release it and then claim that we didn't do it. Maybe we should spend that money on trying to fix the problems that we have here and now. Maybe we shouldn't send $1 billion in relief that Biden just did to Africa when your own North Carolina is still suffering from the effects of a astronomical flood that has never happened before in that area and that nobody could prepare for. Like, at what point are we going to realize as a country, hey, look into your own eye first? Like, solve the problems you have here before you start trying to solve the problems of the world. And I am all about helping out those in need around the world. However, first you got to take care of your own, because they are paying you the taxpayer dollars. It's not your money to spend on whatever it is that fits your fancy for that week. I'm talking to you, government. Just frankly, take the ones that have elected you, take the constituents in your own party that elected you and say, I'm going to take care of them because it's their money that I'm spending. But then again, that's the rant for another day. So getting back to mental illness, and I want to tell this brief story. So I represented a young man. He was 21 years old. It was in Tarrant County, and he had had sex with his 7-year-old sister. Horrible, right? But you're thinking automatically, F that guy should be put away for life. Normally, I would agree with you. But he had the mental acuity of a 5-year-old. He was not as mentally cognizant as the 7-year-old that he was having sex with. It's a horrible situation. And by the way, it was his sister, and the parents didn't know what to do. So obviously he gets arrested, but there's something called mental competence in criminal law. And a person cannot be tried if they're not mentally competent to understand what it is that they did wrong. He didn't understand anything. And it was so sad because by the time they had gotten to me, he had been in jail for a year because they couldn't bond him out, because there was no place for him to go, because they can't take him back into the home. And they would happily have given him to the state to take care of, but there's no place for the state to put him because they don't have enough beds available at the mental institution that should be there to take care of him. So he waited a year and a half, and I'm telling you, the guards told me these horror stories where he was being abused daily at the jail. Just think about this. You're 21, but you don't know you're 21. You think you're 5. And daily you are being used for sex at a prison by grown men, and you have no idea why. You don't even know why you're there. You don't even know what you did wrong. You think everyone in the world hates you. Your parents hate you because they don't want to come see you. They can't take you back. Life as you know it. I mean, this is a person who's suffering as much as a person humanly can because they don't know why they're suffering. And it breaks my heart. And, I'm trying actually not to cry at the moment, but just think about if you had an individual that you loved and there's nothing that you can do, and there you just watch them in pain. And I tried to explain this to the court and say he needs to be transferred, and it's right away. He needs to be protected. Like, that's what our society is supposed to do. Yes, what he did was bad, but he didn't know what he was doing because his body's 21. He has urges that he doesn't know what to do with. They can't explain to him the birds and the bees because he's 5 mentally. And so after 18 months, he finally gets sent to a mental institution because they have room for him. But it's 18 months of pain and suffering that didn't need to happen because we do not, as a society, give enough resources to places to house those people. We give it to plenty of other things, but somehow those people get lost. And that's the reason that we have such a problem dealing with mental illness in the country. All this going back to Jordan Neely had a mental illness. He's walking up and down a subway, and his dad even said it, and his dad now is suing Daniel Penny civilly, but this person needs help. I have a question for Dad. You're suing Daniel Penny civilly because he actually did something to help others. What did you do to help your son? Stop looking for someone to blame. He protected, in his mind, and that's what he's on trial for, is did he go too far in his protection? The prosecution agree that something needed to be done. They just disagree with how he did it. Why was Jordan Neely not getting the help that he needed? Okay, as a society, that is the real issue. But going back to the facts of this case, Lacey, the police investigated this case after it happened. They didn't arrest Daniel Penny. They let him go. The police were on the scene. What does that tell you as a citizen? The police there interviewed the people that saw everything as it happened, when it happened. They were there on the spot, and they said, Mr. Penny, you're free to go. Why would they let him go if he did something wrong?
Because they didn't view it as wrong or have any evidence.
Because there's no evidence to suggest he did anything other than defend himself and others. Which brings us to the point of this whole podcast today is, if you are defending others, which is what he was doing, and he clearly states that, do we as a society get to then judge and say, well, we don't like the way that you did it, but we wanted you to do it? Well, then step up and stand a post, ladies and gentlemen. You don't get to sit on your ass and complain unless you're willing to do something yourself. And the truth is that the mental illness should have been dealt with before Mr. Neely got on the subway. That didn't happen. The subway should have been protected by police officers or whoever gets the money from the subway tokens, right? You're getting money, do something with it other than complain. So it wasn't protected properly. Maybe have one police officer per car. Is that so much to ask? Or per train? So if something like that happens, he can go from cart to cart to go get in, right? Why is that such a difficult task? Well, maybe because it's you guys catch and release everybody that comes into your jails. Maybe. Again, cart for a different day. We'll talk about that later. But if you just look at this thing with common sense, what exactly or why exactly are they coming back and charging Daniel Penny now? Now they did, and it's been going on for about 15 months or so. I believe personally that it's because it was a white Marine and a black performer. If you just change the facts and you make that a black Marine, do you think this case gets prosecuted in the state of New York?
I don't know. Yeah.
Obviously, we can't answer that, but I bet it doesn't. Now, let's just take political out of it for a minute. Let's just say the DA actually thought that Daniel Penny had some sort of intent to harm, which is really, when you talk about criminally negligent homicide and manslaughter, let's talk about the differences between murder and manslaughter. So murder, you have an intent to kill, right? Lacey, you did something to me. I want to get back at you. I want to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Manslaughter
can be accidental.
Can be an accidental death. Like, I intended to harm and I was reckless. And that's going to be the legal terminology the jury is going to have to determine is reckless. Was Daniel Penny reckless in his method of restraint? And if he was so reckless that he should have known that what he was doing could cause death, then you have the elements necessary for manslaughter. Criminally negligent homicide is a little bit different. And then you're using the word negligence. You're like, was it so negligent, so far beyond, so grossly negligent that he was ignoring all of the risks associated with the restraint that he was doing, that he should have known that what he was doing would have led to this result, right? So taking that all as it is, and we know that there's a chokehold, and we're going to play that for you. We're going to let you decide. You have, what you're going to see is Daniel Penny restraining this young man, Jordan Neely, but you're going to see Jordan Neely's arms moving. You're going to see another guy holding Jordan Neely's arms. Well, there are other people once Daniel Penny put him in the chokehold. And when I say chokehold, it is to describe the position that Daniel Penny was in. It is not to describe what he was doing, because you can apply different types of pressure to the throat area. You can apply pressure that cuts off the circulation, which is the sign. You can apply pressure to the trachea, which is the airway. Sometimes it is a defensive position where you just put your arm around him to stop him from moving, stop him from harming others. Now, the question the jury is asking itself is, well, first, was that unreasonable? Then second, did it cause the death? Here's an interesting tidbit, factually, that came out throughout the jury.
Okay.
Medical examiners, what do you think their job is, Lacey?
To investigate how someone died.
Cause of death. Exactly right. All right. Now, do you think a medical examiner is considered an expert?
Yes.
And that's exactly right, too, because an expert has specialized knowledge that someone else does not have, i.e. the jury. So that's what makes them an expert. You have to qualify as an expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're an expert at something, tell me something you're an expert in.
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. All right. Perfect example. So you're an expert in Taylor Swift, and you're saying this person, right? This song is a forgery. This is not Taylor Swift. You know it. You're the expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if I told you, I asked you a question like, well, have you heard Taylor Swift sing that song? And you were to say no. Does that sound like you're missing a pretty vital piece of information?
Yeah.
Right, because you need to know what Taylor Swift sounds like singing that particular song to know that that's not her, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Similarly, what if a medical examiner got on the stand and said, I know that this person, Jordan Neely, died from that chokehold. And a question was posed to that expert and said, do you or did you look at the drugs that were in Mr. Neely's system prior to making that conclusion?
And they said no.
And they said no.
They said, what drugs?
Well, no, they just said, no, we didn't look into that. So they're claiming something to be true, right? This person died medically. As an expert, I am saying that person died from the chokehold, but they didn't consider alternative possibilities like drugs killed him.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say that person is doing? And in your example, as a Taylor Swift expert, they're ignoring potential information that you need to have. They actually, and they went as far in cross-examination to ask this question. So what you're saying, Mr. Medical Expert, Medical Examiner of New York City, is that even if they found an elephant's size dose of fentanyl in Mr. Neely's body after death, you would still consider this a choking death, right?
Wow.
What's the problem with that? Imagine you're a juror, Lacey.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear something like that the medical examiner declared a person dead prior to having all the evidence, what are you thinking?
That they're not informed. That
Right.
This is an opinion.
And are you thinking, what the heck is this guy doing as an expert in anything? Like, the first thing that we are taught, right, as a juror, is make sure it's a fact. Don't you think that that's the first thing the doctors are taught? You know, it's kind of funny. Have you ever seen the show Scrubs?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Did you ever remember there's like a guy, I think his name was Doug or something, but he was always in medical school. He was kind of the laughing stock. You remember him?
Mm-hmm.
What did he become? Because he couldn't make it through medical school. I mean, he was literally like the bottom of the barrel class. Everybody made fun of him for always making mistakes. What did he become on the show?
I'm going to guess nurse.
He became the medical examiner.
Oh,
Yeah.
I should have.
This is where bad doctors go. I'm not kidding you. So I had this case, and this was an aggravated assault case. And the victim in this case had just finished testifying after 5 hours, and I had done my cross-examination. They brought the medical examiner, and the medical examiner is a doctor, and it was a female, and she had said, look, I looked at all of the 136 pages of medical reports in this case, and I can definitively say that the marks on this person's neck were definitely choke marks. Okay. So they pass it over to me. And I go, all right, so how many patients have you diagnosed? Just simple questions like, how many patients have you diagnosed in your time as a doctor? None. I'm sorry, say that again. You just say none? And she goes, none. I was like, okay. And do you have experience dealing with patients? And of course, I knew the answer, but the answer was, well, yes. In what state were those patients when you dealt with them? Were they alive or dead? They were dead. So let me get this straight, doctor. You have diagnosed a live person. Do you realize that? She goes, yes, I'm aware. And you've done it based on paper without any examination of the person themselves, right? And she goes, correct. Without any examination into the alleged causes of these marks, right? She's like, right. Or any other alternative explanation for these marks. She goes, that's correct. And I was like, by the way, are there other alternative explanations for having marks on a neck? And she goes, no. I was like, oh, so if a person has something, a mark on their neck like this, and I just press my own neck, then it means that I was choked. And she goes, absolutely. And I was like, are you starting to realize why you're a medical examiner? And of course, the jury laughed. And what we did is we established in very quick order that the medical examiner has no idea what they're talking about. In fact, they are told what to say. Now, is that ethical for you to tell an expert what to say if you're a lawyer?
Mm-mm.
No. Why? Because we want what? What is the goal of any trial? To elicit what?
Facts.
Facts, so that we can get to truth. So I'm just suggesting, and maybe the ladies and gentlemen of that jury will see this at some point. Maybe they won't. But for those of you out there, if you have a person that is not considering alternative explanations, then they are forming what, Lacey?
An opinion.
An opinion. And is opinion fact? Almost never. That's why they say that's a he said, she said, that he forms an opinion, she forms an opinion, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Well, that's not always the case medically. So what the defense did is they put on their own expert and they said, no, we actually analyzed the body and what was in the body. And we found that it was a combination of things that led to the death. Certainly the choking could have played a part, but it is much more likely that the drugs that were consumed led to the death. Because when you have drugs and you don't know how they're going to affect the human body, and you cut off circulation to the extent that maybe you don't have as much oxygen as you would normally have, then it's going to lead to a problem. Let's think about the George Floyd death. The George Floyd death would not have been a death but for the cocktail of drugs that he had in his system. Now, does that mean that what they did was okay? No. I'm certainly not advocating that. But there's a certain point where you have to start thinking about the person that it is affecting and say, how are we supposed to know that this person is out there doing a bunch of drugs? Again, not to rationalize George Floyd, but we go back to this situation and we all agree on one thing. We wanted someone to act. We can also all agree that the person that should have been there to act, i.e. an officer or some other security personnel, wasn't there to act. So we have decided to criminalize, in essence, the Good Samaritan who came to help. Lacey, do you think that anybody is ever going to want to do anything on a subway to help anyone ever again?
No, and that's very scary.
And why? Why is it now that you think, and just in hearing what we've heard, we don't know what the jury is going to decide. We do know that he's being prosecuted. Do you think that is what is discouraging people or will discourage people in the future?
Mm-hmm.
So what have we done now as a DA? So DAs have an obligation to be ethical. Now, that doesn't mean that my ethical opinions control everyone's ethical opinions, because like we said, that's just an opinion. And the DA in New York that's prosecuting this case may have a completely different opinion than mine. That's fine. When I was a DA, I had a different opinion than my supervisor on certain cases. It's okay to differ. but they need to understand the ramifications of what they've just done. Whether or not he's found guilty, he still had to go through the process. Do you know how much money it costs to go through a trial like this that is nationally publicized?
I'm guessing a whole lot.
It, in New York, in a jury, in Manhattan, under these situations, I can't imagine that the defense fees are less than 100, 200, maybe even $300,000 or $400,000. Most people don't have that money, which means you get a court-appointed public defender or a court-appointed lawyer, and then they're billing the government for this money. So your taxpayer dollars are funding the defense, which has also now cost you because your taxpayer dollars don't pay for the defense that should have been, which was that really simple officer, right? That could have stopped this whole situation. They could have called for the officer. It's over. Do you think that they're now going to change their regulations and actually put an officer on the subway? Kind of doubt it,
Well,
right? And we're holding on to these, I want to say, ideologies as cities, as somehow we are fighting back against the man, whether you think that's Trump or whether you think that's a Republican Party or whoever, or why they think they're doing this. But it's to the detriment of the citizen. And keep in mind, Daniel Penny is a citizen too, doing what he believed is the right thing, and he's being criminalized for it. And so that kind of leads us into, should people be able to be prosecuted based on a political opinion? Because that's what I think this boils down to, is that they had this narrative in their mind that this is some white Marine and this is some black guy is a poor soul. No, this is not white or black. This is person who's threatening other people, and this is person who's protecting other people. If you prosecute the person who's protecting, then in life, it has far-reaching consequences, maybe not just in New York. In life, people are going to be less inclined to help. Tell me, Lacey, does that make us a better society or a worse one?
A worse one if someone's too scared to help someone else because of the ramifications and legality that it can cause.
And we're not talking about doing something crazy. We're just talking about applying just a little common sense. And what I have found by and large throughout government is that as soon as they get into government, common sense just seems to leave the window. Like it's gone. Now, that's not everybody. But by and large, what you see is a lot of things that just like, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And then I watch all these movies that show, and probably our audience has too, all of these FBI agents and these, undercover officers who are going undercover with these horrible people, horrible mafia type organizations. And then they say, well, we can't prosecute because we can't prove our case, so we're not going to arrest everybody yet. This is just nonsense, because the normal person, you, the audience member, are getting arrested based on an opinion with no hope of a conviction. Here in Dallas County, if you respond, if somebody calls 911 and police respond, there is a policy in place, horrible as it may be, that if the police officers show up to a family violence response, somebody goes to jail. And they got to make a choice. It doesn't matter that when the police get there, you say, argument's over, everything's fine, go away. They're like, nope, we got called out, somebody's going to jail. And they get to determine who. And sometimes I have seen it where the person says, but they didn't touch me. This was just a verbal argument. Everything's fine. We called 911 just to de-escalate the situation. And then the officers get there and escalate it. And they have to pay for a defense for something that didn't happen and the officers knew didn't happen. Like, this is just wrong. And if they didn't do it that way, then your taxpayer dollars would be much more protected, because that person is now free to do something that they should be doing. Which is why you see all these people in the back of squad cars. Oh, hey, why am I getting arrested? There's so much more people out there. They're doing much worse than I am. Even though that's not a good thing to say, and audience members, don't do that. Like, don't ridicule the officer for making a decision that you did something wrong, right? He gets to make that call. That's why we pay them. What I want to do is make sure that we pay them to do the right things, which is go after those people, take them off the streets, use the same burden of proof that you really lack in other cases to go arrest the people that should be arrested and should be arrested, but you're like, I don't have it on this guy. I can't prove it. Well, you can't prove half of the arrests that you make, but you make them. And the problem is that you make them against the ordinary citizen, and they're the ones that suffer. Make them against the people are doing the wrong things, and you say, well, I can't prove it. Well, you have probable cause to believe it. Guess what? That is the burden to arrest in this country. It is up to the DA to prove the case, which you often tell me on the stand, officers, in cross-examination. Well, I make the arrest decision. I don't make beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, then stop making it. Go out there and arrest the people that need to be arrested. Go out there and stop the Jordan Neelys before the citizen has to step in and do your job for you. This is not an indictment on all police officers. Don't take it that way. I just get very upset when I see that we're prosecuting the citizen that's doing the job that somebody else was paid to do, and that maybe in the state of New York or city of New York, they're instructed not to do. They probably are instructed to leave the homeless alone. But maybe instead of spending billions on other countries, we can create a barn-dominium with a bunch of bunks, and it's got 3 squares a day if you want it. Therein lies the solution to the homeless problem, right there. The government has land. Take it, build a big-ass warehouse, put a bunch of bunks in it, and have some food there. That doesn't cost that much money. But instead, we're going to spend that on arms for another country or something else. I mean, the list goes on, which is why I'm really happy we're going to have this DOGE, right? Department of Government Efficiency. I don't know what they're going to do, but I'd really like to know that we as a country can start spending money on the things that do matter, which is going back to this case. If we had that money allocated, maybe Jordan Neely is alive today. So who's the real culprit here? Well, maybe it's the government for not having the security, not having the mental illness ability for somebody that has a mental illness to go to them for help, even if they don't have money. I can't tell you how often people are turned away because they don't have the right insurance. But if you have no insurance, you're accepted. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, this is something that is a problem. We can stop the problem that exists because these people have no treatment for it, no doctors to see. I'd really like us as society to get back to that and say, instead of this is the solution to this problem, like this one particular trial, we're going to put this guy on trial, we're going to make it national news. Instead of making this, have a real solution. See that the problem for what it is and fix the underlying problem. It's kind of like if you put a Band-Aid on a cut, right? It doesn't fix the cut. It's just a Band-Aid. Let's stop putting a Band-Aid on the cut. Let's fix the underlying problem so people don't get cut in the future. Right?
I agree.
So regardless of your political ideations, we need to come together and say, this affects everyone the same way, mental health. And somehow this devolved from a criminal explanation of the Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely trial into a, we need help for our mental ill people in this country. So not to close it out with that, and getting back to the Daniel Penny trial real quick, here's what I would say about that if I'm the defense lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot afford as a country, this would be my closing, that has already happened, and they did a closing, which I haven't actually had time to review, but this is what I would tell someone in a closing, because you, the citizen, have a right to protect your other citizens. It's called defense of others. In the state of Texas, you can even use deadly force. So here I am getting back to the nice defense lawyer stuff right now, teaching you guys something. You have the right for self-defense and the use of defense of others, and you can use deadly force to do it if you, the citizen, believe that it is reasonable. And how is the state going to prove that it wasn't reasonable? So and I don't know the laws in New York, but somehow this is getting lost, is that Daniel Penny comes out and says that what I did, I believed was justified and reasonable. Well, who's to say otherwise? Even if he did die, so what? If he believed that that was necessary to stop the threat, he is entitled to do so. And only Daniel Penny knows if he believes it's reasonable or not. We are not God. And so I would go back to an example. We don't get to question whether or not he thinks it's reasonable. We get to question whether or not, in this particular case, he was acting thinking that what he was doing was reasonable. If he believes it's reasonable, unless you have some evidence to suggest otherwise, he's not guilty. Unless you have proof that what he did is so far beyond the rounds of negligence. In other words, he knew that what he was going to do would cause a death. How is Daniel Penny supposed to know he's suffering from mental illness? How is Daniel Penny supposed to know what drugs he is on at that time? Let's get real, people. The defense here is very simple. Even if what he did contributed to the cause of death, which we know the medical examiner is not even willing to listen, but even if what Daniel Penny did contributed to the death, his right to defense of others controls here. He has the right to do what he did, and we should stop prosecuting people because of the color of their skin, whether that's black or white, yellow or orange. We should stop prosecuting people and substituting our opinion for their Good Samaritan desires, the desire to help, because it does discourage it in the future. And if we continue to do this as a society, your society will continue to erode to the point where it becomes unrecognizable, and very soon you will not have a society. So there's this statement that I really like to close with that I've heard on many different people say, and I think it's true, is that strong men lead to good times. Good times lead to weak men, and weak men lead to bad times. Substitute gender for whatever you want in that. But we had strong men once in this country, and it led to a lot of good times. But I believe that for many, 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 many years now, we have been governed by weak men, susceptible to bribes, susceptible to influences that are in their self-interest rather than the interest of the whole, the country. And those are weak men, and they have now led to bad times. We need to turn that around. We need to get back to strong men and women.
Very well said, Mark Lassiter, with your hot opinions. I love your passion on everything. I really do. I love your passion, your energy. I like your information that you share.
And if I appreciate that, and if I can leave people with this one thing, do the research yourself. Don't believe me because I say it. Read the books, read the literature, because if not, you are the uninformed and you are part of the problem. I don't speak from no knowledge here. You've got to read the books. You have got to read the literature, and don't just get your sources from the news, which we have seen time and time again promulgate things that are in their best interests. Look at both sides.
Educate and inform.
That's right.
Always. Mark Lassiter, how do people get a hold of you?
You can reach me at www.lomtl, and you can reach us at 214-845-7007.
Thank you so much, Mark Lassiter.